Anybody got a good joke? There's one about the Presbyterian minister that went off to the racetrack. Didn't let anybody see him go because they're not supposed to do that. But he went to the racetrack and saw a priest down there with one of the horses. Priest was, crossing in front of the horse's head, and off went the horse, and it won the race. So the Presbyterian minister said, I think I'll bet on whatever he blesses next time. So sure enough, and that horse won. So the Presbyterian, well, he's not a minister, just a Presbyterian, okay? He ran to the bank real quick to get all his money because he thought, man, I'm going to make it this afternoon. So he ran back and came back from the bank, and he saw the priest down there. And the priest was blessing the horse in the head. Then he went down and blessed him around the chest area. And then he went around behind him and blessed him. And the horse took off and fell dead right in the halfway down. The guy comes running down, this Presbyterian comes running down, says, what happened? What happened? How did he come out? He died like that. And the priest says, that's the trouble with you Protestants. You don't know a blessing from a last rite. Can I tell another? While he's working here, I could tell him that. Now, I don't think anybody else is coming, do you? Before we get started, I actually want Larry to make an announcement about something very important, and I don't want to forget it.
Okay. Let me borrow your mic. Okay. Before we ended out in the spring sessions of the Academy, as you already know, we followed through with donating food for the folks that are down in our migrant community, and so that response has been excellent. We really appreciate that. But we also talked about maybe enough of us going on the van down to Mulberry and visit the school and get to know all that program. And there was a very enthusiastic response. And then we said, let's wait till the fall. Well, the fall's here, almost. So we're going to put out the word and see how many of you are interested. Shamanda says that the van ride and everything is free. So it's just a matter of reserving a date and a time in the van to make sure the folks there will greet us, and we'll go. So by a raising of hands, how many of you would be interested?
Here.
Hands up. Okay, well, that's almost a van load, and then we'll put the word out and see what's the capacity of a van.
How many can go in the van? That's the question.
Huh?
How many how many seats in the van?
I don't know. I've never been in.
Amanda,
20?
do you know?
It's a 20 passenger?
We have right now can hold up to 7. And so if we have to take 2 trips, we can. I don't know if the bus is ready, but the bus goes up to 24.
24?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Need the bus, and obviously we got more than 7 hands.
Yep. So I don't know how to put the word out overall. If we can put a sign-up list in the, if we can put the sign, go ahead, Shamanda. You put the word out, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'll get with the folks down there and see what time of the week it's a good time, and we'll set a date and go. Maybe a little later in September.
I think so, a little cooler.
Cooler? Okay. All right.
Thank you, Larry. Well, welcome to the Academy. We did a light during the summer, as you know, and it was light and joyful and light in attendance. And it's good to see about 30 of you out here. And that's really great to start this new season. Remember, we do 2 a year, 2 a month, first and third Mondays at 3 o'clock. It's never changed in 15 years, even though I get people asking me often, now, where is it? Now, what is it? But anyway, we've got a good setup, a good slate for the fall. It's all set up through December. And we have a great steering committee, and they are here except those who are on vacation. There's Connie Beauvais, there's Beatty Raymond, there's Larry, whom you've already seen, and Wayne. What did I see? Was Wayne here? Oh, there, it's behind you. I didn't. Wayne, thank you. Matter of fact, I thought you were gone. Bob Tebby is out in Lord knows where, Antarctica or someplace. No, I think it's Arctica this time, not Antarctica. And he's the only one not here, right? Thank you, both, all of you. Let me talk about the next meeting, 2 weeks from now, the 16th. It's going to be Susan McPhail Taylor, one of our residents, one of our working residents. She is a licensed, in the state of Florida, care for elderly associate. So she's going to talk, naturally, about elderly care, insurance, other activities, and she will be the specialist. Susan McPhail Taylor. She lives over there in what I call a circle, which used to be right behind my house, but I can't say that anymore. She has 4 degrees, by the way. She's got one more than I do. So I'm going to come out and hear her. She's got to be important. Well, you've all heard of Charlemagne. As a matter of fact, Barbara over here studied in grade school. High school. Okay, and fell in love with Charlemagne, right? He had a lot of mistresses. I didn't say that. All of you are, well, most of you are descendants of Charlemagne. Most of you are. If you're not, you're descendant of somebody else who was alive in 800. Okay? I mean, I guarantee that from a mathematical standpoint. The people who were alive in 800, Charlemagne was one of them, and he had lots and lots of descendants. There are societies. If you're an uppity, you can join the Crown of Charlemagne Society. Queen Elizabeth was a member. So are all her descendants, that is Harry and William. And baby what? What's the little boy's name? George, Edward, something or other? Anyway, if you're from German ancestry, I guarantee you that you are a descendant of Charlemagne. I don't happen to be, having been descendant of Denmark folk and going over to England with the Vikings, and that was too late to be a descendant of Charlemagne. So I really regret that very much. I might be a descendant of the Saxons, though. If you're a descendant of Saxon, it's because one of those guys jumped in the river and baptized himself at the point of a sword. If he didn't, you're not a descendant of him, okay? Because he's dead. Charlemagne baptized hundreds and hundreds of Saxons. Not he himself, but his bishops. But he had soldiers with swords that said, okay, Saxon, dip your head. So Don's going to tell you all about that. We got Don Keene here. All of you know him, mainly because when you're in the dining room, you can hear him. Yeah. I'm just kidding, Don. But Don is a retired minister. Maybe he was the guy who was going down there and bedding the Presbyterian minister. Anyway, he's a theologian, and so he knows about Charlemagne and his religious reformation and all those good things. So he's going to talk to us about it. Let's see, do I need to say anything else? Probably not. But we're going to start at the beginning. He's going to start, well, maybe I'll start at the beginning. The beginning is the 4th century. Now, why is it the beginning is the 4th century? Because of the Arian heresy. Okay, so where's my, no, never mind, I'll click for it in a minute. There was a Nicene Council, and I bet you every one of you have read the Nicene Creed. They stick it way in the back of the hymnal. For Methodists and Lutherans and Catholics and Presbyterians, you read that long thing. It takes about 10 minutes to read. No, not really that long. It's a long thing, though. Now, what happened there? They were trying to find out the nature of Christ. Charlemagne, okay, not Charlemagne, the same guy with a C, Constantine. Constantine had just become emperor, sole emperor of all of Rome, and he had just decided to be a Christian. Why had he become a Christian? Because he was losing a battle, and people had been pestering him about this Christian thing and all, and so he prayed to God, and he saw a cross in the sky, and he promised that he would become a Christian if he won the battle. And he won the battle. So he became a Christian. Now, they like to do things in order, just like Presbyterians. Do things in the right way, in the order. So he called all his bishops together, about 90 of them from various places. Middle East, Africa, Anatolia, Europe. About 90 of them came to Nicaea, which is only a few horse rides from Constantine. Now, he was not an egoist. He just named the town Constantine after himself, you know. But he did that, and so they all came, and they couldn't decide on the nature of Christ. They had about 15 different natures, and they were worshiping in different ways. But they finally came together on what Don's going to talk about later, the Trinity. Okay? And there were folks who didn't like that. Now, the ones who liked it, like, say, Santa Claus, St. Christopher, he was there. St. Christopher was there. And this guy named Arius, that we're going to talk about, was there. The argument got so heated, this is true now, the argument got so heated that he wasn't a saint yet, Christopher goes across the room and slaps him almost silly. And so he was put in jail for that. It took a long time to get back out, because that was a no-no in front of Constantine. So I'm going to stop with that, because that's enough to get Don started. So Don, you want the podium? If I can get back out of it without falling, you can have it. Okay, how did that all begin? There we go.
Okay,
320.
The first thing I want to say is some of my statistics may not agree with Gene's. The problem with scholars is their numbers don't always jive. But that's not of primary importance. Let me say that I want to begin by saying Jesus asked his disciples one time, "Who do men say that I am?" Well, they said, "Some think you're Baptist reincarnated. Some say you're one of the prophets like Isaiah or Jeremiah." There were a bunch of answers. And then Jesus said, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter, being Peter, chimed in and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He had the advantage of not having to explain what those terms meant. That's what got the church in trouble ever after, even up to today. Now, many, many years later, a guy by the name of Harry Truman said, by quoting a scholar, "If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it." So what I'm going to mention is, whatever we learn about the Holy Roman Empire or the empire of Constantine and his followers should tell us something about history, and let's hope that we learn something from it. Now this, throughout the world in the time of Jesus, Christianity was spread all over the place. It existed in Rome and in Africa and Egypt and England and many places around Jerusalem and to the east, and of course its followers spread it throughout much of the rest of the world. Now that's in the time of Christ. Now after the 15th century, North Africa, Egypt, the Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, the Arab world, Islam, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey, all of these countries became predominantly Muslim. What happened? That's the question. What does this history tell us? Well, it tells us a lot of things, and I'm just going to touch on them. We'll start with Constantine. He becomes emperor. In 313, after being emperor for a short time, he said that Christians were no longer outlaws. In 313, they became a legal faith. And you might think that was a good thing. That's questionable whether it was or wasn't. Here was the problem. He had hoped that many of the conflicts that existed in his time in the Roman Empire might be resolved by getting all of these Christians on board. The first thing that happened to Constantine, he was totally shocked. These Christians were more divided than the pagans. They fought with each other, they killed each other, they excommunicated each other, they wouldn't have communion together. They were a pretty nasty bunch of people. They really were. Attila the Hun and many other barbarians pushed into the outer regions of the Roman Empire. The empire had to spend more and more money to support the armies that pushed these people back, or at least kept them under control. But Constantine thought, well, we can get these Christians who love one another and are appreciative of all human beings, at least that's what he thought they thought. If we get them together, they can help us stabilize the empire. And so this is probably the beginning of a union of church and state. Now, our forefathers, many generations later, said, be cautious about church and state. government ought to have a separation between church and state. That was good advice. They must have known some history. Okay.
And now we get to the Trinity, and we get to Arius.
Yeah, well, Arius, the problem with many of those Christians, that they didn't believe in the divine nature of Jesus. They thought he was more human than divine. Well, I'm not sure where they were on that spectrum, but they certainly focused a lot on his human nature. So he calls the Council of Nicaea. That's the way he's going to get the Christians together. Well, about the only thing they really did resolve at Nicaea is they firmed up the fact that the Holy Spirit, that God and Christ were one. And I think he probably took a sigh of relief and said, now, that's good. We got these Christians all together. But that didn't happen. And there were all kinds of struggles between the Christians and among themselves. Now, at the time that the Council of Nicaea was called, there were anywhere from 250 to 318 representatives at Nicaea.
A lot of them were deacons.
According to...
Weren't that many bishops, but they were sure a bunch of deacons.
They weren't all bishops,
Yeah,
no.
I
They
got
were
you.
all, but they were churchmen.
Yep.
How they got there, I'm not sure. Most of the ones at Constantine were from the Eastern Mediterranean, but there was one representative from Italy, one from Spain, one from Gaul, one from North Africa, one from Persia, one from Scythia, and of course one from Rome, the capital of Italy. The bishop from Rome was old enough that he didn't want to make that long journey, so he sent Arius. That was an accident of history that he may have regretted after the fact. I don't know. The problem with Arius is he basically stressed the humanity of Jesus, or the humanity of Christ. And so frankly, the council affirmed the Trinity, but it just raised a bigger question, the question about the nature of Christ. And so, since the problem wasn't really solved, the next council was the council in 381, the Council of Constantinople, called, interestingly enough, by an emperor. It was an ecclesiastical or church council called by a secular emperor. And they wanted to understand the character of Christ. What was the relationship between his human and his divine nature? Oh, this council, which one am I talking about now? The first one, the Council of Ephesus at 431. To make a long story short, the Bishop of Constantinople, Notorious, went away from that council excommunicated. They threw him out. He was a heretic. They didn't want to have anything to do with him. They drove, many years later, when the Eastern Church split from the Western Church, there was a Nestorian church, many followers of Nestorius.
We got to get to the Arians
So,
pretty soon, you know. We got to get the Arians, and we got to chase them out, okay? So let's chase them out. Want to?
They chased him out.
Here we go. Who chased them out? The Franks. Now, if you've lived long enough and gone to enough academies, you would know that the Franks saved Christianity twice. They're going to save it right here because the West German Franks were called upon by the Pope to come down and save Rome from the Visigoths, who were Arian, who did not believe the Trinity. He says, get rid of them. Run them out. You Franks are tough. You run them out. So they said, we'll do it under conditions. What are the conditions? There they are, and you can see that the blue is actually the Visigoths. That's a bad map there. I didn't do it, but it's a bad map anyway.
Now, there was another council called at Ephesus in 449, which came in history to be called the Gangster Council. That was pushed by some people from Alexandria. They believed in Christ and God had one substance, one nature. So they called this council and got the bishops all together, as well as some other clergy type people. And the Bishop of Constantinople was there. He condemned the split between the one nature and the two nature people. The sad part about this, a big mob of some monks, some people from Alexandria, beat Flavius up so bad that he died 3 days, I think 3 days later, very shortly after that. Eventually, the Council of 451, they condemned that council. They threw it out. They said it never happened. They just denounced it. And this, to me, is the pivotal council in all of Christianity. The Nicene Creed, in terms of its importance for the history of the church, is not near as important as the Council of Chalcedon in 451. It was pivotal. First of all, they outlawed the Gangster Council. They condemned the Bishop of Alexandria for pushing the fight. They decided that the previous arguments among the councils and the population of Christians and all the bishops and all these different churches was too extreme. And so they finally concluded that Christ was of two substances but one nature. He was fully human and fully divine. That's a paradox. Fortunately, they didn't try in depth to explain it. What they did was make a lot of leg room for the people that are on one nature or two nature sides to fight with each other.
So, Clovis couldn't understand any of that. Clovis is supposed to take care of getting the Arians out, and all he cared about was hitting them over the head with an axe. But he did. He ran them past the Pyrenees, got them totally out of France. What happened? Pope, what's the Pope's name? Leo? Leo the III? No, that's wrong. That's another one. This is Bishop Remy, who said, okay, Clovis, we'll make you king since you're doing all this.
Yeah.
And the church, the church will be the great daughter. France will become the great daughter of the church, okay? So we're going to keep going and see what old Clovis, oh goodness.
Yeah, Clovis was became the king of the Franks in 508.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right. So there he is, right there. And there's the kingdom before he ran them out. Those are all Visigoths. They're all Arian. And so that's a bunch of folks to have the Franks come down and take care of.
Now,
But the Pope had no army, right? So
one of the problems we face is we probably were taught somewhere in our training that the church at Rome was superior to all of the other bishops. That was really not the case. All of those other bishops in the geographic areas of Jerusalem, in Syria, which was Antioch, Constantinople, Egypt, all of them had equal authority within their geographic area. And in theory, they were not supposed to mess with somebody else's region, but they did. They fought with each other forever. And the two worst were Alexandria and Antioch in Syria. Antioch believed in the two natures of Christ. Alexandria believed Christ was of one nature. And that fight really went on, really as long as the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire existed. And it helps us explain, if we reflect on it, why Islam was so powerful in that period in the life of the church. Just as an aside, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, Damascus in 366 to 384 was, in later history, deemed one of the important Roman popes from the city of Rome. He's the one that fell back on the words of Christ, "Thou art Peter, upon whom on this rock I will build my church."
we got to get there in a hurry now. We got to get Clovis baptized and get the Franks to save Christianity twice. I'm going to tell an anecdote to wake them back up. Here's the anecdote. They were fighting at a place called Soissons, north of Paris. The Franks were fighting. And the bishop came to, the Franks, by the way, were Frank. That's where the word comes from. And not only that, everybody was equal. All the warriors were equal. So they cast lots for the booty that they got when they beat somebody up and got their booty. The bishop at Soissons said to Clovis, "Now don't let them take that chalice. You get the chalice." Well, so they cast lots, and one old soldier of his, a nasty-looking guy, got the chalice. And Clovis said, "Give it to me. I got to give it to the bishop." And the warrior said, "No, we are Franks. It's mine. We cast the lots." And he threw it down and broke it. Grade school kids in France know this story by heart. Clovis took his axe and he said, "Oh, your shoes are untied," while he's, or something like that in Frankish. And he went, "Thus didst thou to the vase of Soissons." Now, they said that in French, of course, not in English. Anyway, so that's an anecdote, and that gets us to show how Christian the Franks were. Anyway, so Don's talking about all these theological things. These guys don't know about it, right? So there you have it. Anyway, so the first daughter of the church, thanks to the Franks, there they are. That's the kingdom of the Franks. And so we're We want to go to 700, or do we want to stay here?
Okay, let's see where we are. Well, back to my aside. This first bishop did a lot of interesting things. He upgraded the library in Rome, and anytime anyone said anything complimentary about one of the Roman popes, it got into the library. That was all to reinforce the special authority of the Pope of Rome. That really didn't work that well in that period. What we think of as the importance of the Pope or of Rome, that came a little later in history. In fact, between 370 and 460, the Patriarch of Rome lost more and more power and authority. Now, part of the reason he lost power was his influence in the Eastern Church receded at the same time that the empire's power in the West, in Italy and in all of the West, in the area of the Franks, same time they gained more power, and the Roman Empire became less influential. And so really from the 3rd century on, the Roman Empire, the founding city of Rome, declined for a period of years in influence. Now let me just quickly illustrate some examples of that. The emperors of Rome, the civil emperor people, the emperors of Rome, moved the capital to Milan at one time, to Trier in Germany, to Siberia. All of this before Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople. And they just didn't move it to get a better climate or a nicer environment. They moved it to be close to the armies who were fending off these pagan intruders who were either sacking or moving into their territory. And when they moved into the fringe territories, Rome lost taxing areas and areas where they gained tribute, and they didn't have the money to fight these wars. And then on top of that, they turned around and found the Christians fighting with each other over the two natures of Christ, and they were as bad as the pagans.
And here comes the Saracens. Here comes the Saracens.
The
Arabs come.
Oh yeah, well that was the second thing. Of course, the grandfather. Are we back there?
We're ready to do that.
Okay.
We're ready to get rid of them Saracens.
Okay, all right.
Islam in Spain. They're trying to come up through France. They're in the France territory. They're around Marseille. They're around Strasbourg. But what are we going to do? The kings are do-nothing kings. They're worthless. So guess what happens? One of the guys who is the chatelain of the palace, named Charles, says, I'll take care of them. So he does. He's Charles the Hammer. Charles the Hammer. So he meets these Saracens at a place called Tours on the Loire River. Now, you read another book and it'll say it's Poitiers, but he's right in the middle between Poitiers and Tours, and they always fought about which town was the town that it happened in. So you can take your choice. Poitiers or Tours is easy to say, so try that one. So there they are. See those two red dots? That's Tours and Poitiers. And
this is the first time that the Arab influence was thwarted by the grandfather of Charlemagne, right?
absolutely.
Father, what was his name? Martel?
This is the guy right here, Charles the Hammer, and there's his hammer, and there he is, And he's the father of a guy named Pepin. Pepin. Now, Pepin, he's an interesting guy. He married a woman called Bertha. Now, Bertha, they both had nicknames. He was Charles the Short, and she was Bigfoot Bertha. Now, I know that's true, and I'll tell you why. They are buried in Saint Denis Church in Paris, where all the kings are buried, and they have something on their casket called a gisant, which is simply a lying. So they've got an effigy, if you will, of whoever it was that's down there somewhere in the crypt, and she has big feet. So I know that she was Bigfoot Bertha. And I don't know what that's got to do with the story, but...
Well, it puts a little humor in it. Well, the important thing is that this guy Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, drives the Arabs down into the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. And for another story, in another century, it took the Christians until the Reconquesto of Spain and Portugal, when they drove the Arabs across across into Morocco. But we're not even going to talk about that. The important thing is this action of the grandfather was critical in creating an environment where the Christians could go after they lost all of those eastern areas like Syria, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem. That all became Arab. Now, without not diverging too far, one of the reasons this happened is in 610, there was a guy who lived in a town called Mecca. His name was Muhammad. He had a vision that said there's only one God, Allah, and we should all worship that one God. And then he had some other things that you should do if you were in Islam. They weren't unlike the things that we are supposed to do as Christians. Give to charity, prayers, lots of other things. But what they did have in common with all of those Christians in Alexandria and Antioch and Constantinople and Jerusalem is most of those Christians were really one nature Christians. They believed that Christ had one nature and was equal with God. They didn't go for any of those heresies like Nestorius in one of the councils was accused of splitting Christ in two because he said, all this Mary stuff, I don't like that. That's a problem. And there was a woman princess that was promoting that, by the way, and I won't go into that detail. But so he said, Mary was the mother of Jesus, but not the God-bearer. In other words, he split the nature of God and the nature of Christ, and that caused holy hell in what was the Christian church in the world at that time. Okay. And that went on forever.
Pepin and Bigfoot Bertha have Charlemagne. Charlemagne and Carloman. Luckily, Carloman died, and Charlemagne became the king of all of the Franks. And guess what? Pope Leo brought him down on Christmas Day and crowned him emperor. Now, why did he crown him emperor?
Well, that's an interesting story. Leo wasn't very popular, Leo III. and all of the friends of the preceding emperor, Hadrian, rose up. He's in a procession in Rome, roaming through the streets of Rome, and two of the followers, two of the people that served in the administration of Hadrian, captured him. They took him, put him in a monastery, stripped him of his papal garb, and said, "You're no longer Pope." And that was the end. Well, the problem there was, interestingly enough, Charlemagne, who was a secular king, he escaped. Leo III escaped from the monastery and fled up into Charlemagne's territory. Is that where you are now?
Yep, that's it.
And they had and the two guys that captured Leo III, they went up and appealed to Charlemagne, and Leo III said, "I didn't do it." They accused him of fornication. He said, "I didn't do it." And so Charlemagne took his word, and he took these two men and said, "You're going to be killed for your indiscretion." Interesting enough, Leo appealed to Charlemagne to show mercy, so Charlemagne put them in a prison, put them in a monastery somewhere, and that really enhanced Charlemagne's respect in the world that he ruled, because not only was he a supporter of order and law, he was charitable enough to not take the life of these two men. So interestingly enough, the next thing that happened is, well, where are we? Do we have anything about the battle into Charlemagne's invasion of Italy?
Of what?
Well, he tried to invade Spain, by the way.
Oh,
where
yes.
his grandfather had.
Absolutely.
But that was a failure. That was the biggest failure, I think, in his life.
There he goes, right there.
Yeah.
Down to Spain. I'll tell you a little story about that.
You tell
one.
the story there. You're better at storytelling than I am.
Well, you know, the Saracens were in Spain, and Charlemagne said, well, I didn't push them all the way out, so I'm going to go down there and defeat them. He went through a little pass in the Pyrenees, went down, fought a while, realized he could not revictual his troops, he could not resupply them, and he might as well go back. So he took off back through the pass, and he left his nephew, a guy named Roland. And Roland was to champion the rear guard and made sure that the Saracens didn't follow through the pass. So Roland is in charge with about 30 some odd guys, and one of them was a bishop. But anyway, so Charlemagne goes down and off he goes with his troops, and there he is, kind of resting as he got through the pass. Charlemagne and the Franks crossing the Alps, it says down there at the bottom. And, okay, so Roland, the nephew of Charlemagne, has this rear guard, and don't pay any attention to that yet. A mighty saga is created when he stops the Saracens at the battle there. And it's the longest and the best poem ever written in the Middle Ages, and it was quoted in every inn on the great trail to Santiago de Compostela. Go from Paris to Santiago, and every 20 miles there was an inn where some jongleur was quoting this song, the Song of Roland. But anyway, so you don't really care. So what he did was he fought, and they began to lose the battle. Charlemagne had said to Roland, if you get into bad shape, blow your horn, and I'll come back. Think about the ego of Roland. Roland kept fighting and fighting until it was only him left. And he thought, maybe I better blow my horn. It's getting kind of dangerous around here. Of course, by that time, Charlemagne was a long way away. So he had to blow really hard. And he blew the horn so hard, guess what happened? He blew his brains out. It's in the story. I didn't make it up. It's in the story. He blew his brains out. But Charlemagne heard the horn. So he comes rushing back. And he starts fighting the Saracens in revenge. And all of a sudden the sun is about to go down. And he prayed to God, hold that sun till I kill some more Saracens. And the sun stayed there for a long time. It's in the story. It's in the song. So, anyway, there he is blowing his horn. Now, we get back to the baptism of the Saxons. You want to talk about them baptisms of Saxons? Or any Christians. I mean, any pagans. Baptize any of them. It's on there somewhere.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where we are.
Yeah, we got Charlemagne baptizing all those people.
Okay, so I'm going to jump forward a little bit. Pippin, the father of Charlemagne, dies. He divides his kingdoms between his two sons, Charlemagne and Culemon, who was renamed Pepin, wasn't he?
He died. He just died. He
died. So okay. Now, when Pepin dies, his wife was no dummy. She had two sons who were in line to be eventual emperors and receive regions over which they would be king. So his wife and his two sons flee into the Lombard country. Do we have a map for that? Oh yeah, receded into the Lombard country. Now, what happens is Charlemagne eventually captures that area. So they flee out of that into another area, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about that. Charlemagne pursues them, and now my book, the scholar in my book doesn't know what happens to the two sons, but he presumes that Charlemagne probably had them killed.
Put them in a monastery.
What?
Put them in a monastery.
Well, he put him in a monastery, but then that's the end of the story.
Yeah, right.
Nobody knows what happened to them. They kind of disappeared out of history. The author of my book on Charlemagne thinks that the probability is that Charlemagne killed them because they were a threat to his empire. I don't know what happened. So now we're down to a very interesting thing. By this time, the empire had split in two. So much chaos, so much Muslim incursion into the Eastern Roman Church that by that time the church was gone, really. It wasn't gone, it was there, but it went into the catacombs, back like the early Christians did. And eventually, the Muslim populations in all of those countries was far greater than the Christians. I was in Turkey Turkey used to be a strong Christian country. It's about 94% Muslim. Now, the only problem with the Muslims is they're as bad as the Christians. Well, I shouldn't say this, but this is my belief. Talking with people in Istanbul, which is Turkey, for example, the present ruler of Turkey took one of the museums and turned it back into a mosque to appease his population. My guide, who was Muslim, said, well, I hope they turn it back into a museum. And she implied that a good many Muslims are somewhat like Christians. They're Christmas and Easter Christians, and they're some kind of Muslims. They don't say all those daily prayers. They might say most of them, and I don't know what impact it has on their daily lives. I'm not in a position to make a judgment on that. But what I will say is we have a lot more in common with Islam than we realize. Many Christians still are monophysite, that is, they believe in one nature of the Holy Trinity. Islam deeply respects Jesus as in the line of the prophets. They just don't believe he was human. Pretty much like the people that argued that God and Jesus were only divine, while there were the people in Antioch who said, no, Jesus is and God are of the same substance. And the last council I referred to, which I said was so pivotal, concluded that the orthodox thing was Jesus is fully human and fully divine.
And we get back to Charlemagne.
No explanation of it. But that, if you don't believe that, you're not a good Christian. They'll throw you out of the church.
Okay, so Charlemagne is going to do something that will cause a Carolingian Renaissance, because he brought the churchmen in and said, you guys can't read Latin. The Latin is written in such a way that nobody can read it. I'm telling you what, there was no space between words, there was no punctuation, it was misspelled. So he brought in, guess who he brought in? He brought in guys from York in England and Dublin in Ireland. He brought in scholars who rewrote and began to teach Latin again, so the priest in the little churches might be able to say Mass. So that's part of, and then that's the reform of the church, part of the reform. Other would be the liturgy. But he also started schools for young boys. Sorry, no girls. Schools for young boys to teach them how to read, and of course, maybe eventually go further in their education. Charlemagne himself was not educated, but he believed in education strongly. And he knew not only his own Germanic tongue, Frankish, but he knew enough Latin to talk in it. And he knew about Greek, and he knew that scholars needed to learn Greek. So we have a Carolingian Renaissance, which only lasted a little while, because unfortunately he had one son named Louis. There are 18 Louis in French history, by the way, of kings. The 18th one was back in the 19th century there, but we won't go into that. But he had only one son. His name was Louis. He was pious. His nickname was Pious, to go with the Bigfoot birther and all that. But Louis, unfortunately, had 3 sons. And the Frankish law was you divide your kingdom into however many sons you have, they split it into that part. And jump in when you want to. So, here they are. Here are the three sons. Lothair, or Luther, Charles, the Bald, Louis, the German. It was nice when they gave people last names. That way they didn't have their nicknames. But, you see that guy in the middle? There's Louis in the middle. Well, he didn't see it. Okay, think about Louis for a minute. Charles the Bald and Louis the Germanic decide they're going to squeeze out the guy in the middle, Luther. There's Luther's part. That's all mountainous. It's all bad territory, most of it. There's Germany, and there's France. And they fight the guy in the middle. What's left of that today? Can you guess? What piece of that is still left? Starts with an L. What piece of land in France starts with an L and it's over by the Loire River? Lorraine. Lorraine is all that's left of poor old Luther's kingdom. And the Germans had it most of the time, and so on and so forth, as he used to say. So there it is. And Germany and France became enemies. Right? They didn't they? How many wars did they fight in our own century? So, no, don't say that. Don's got something to say.
I need to back up just a little bit. Right before Charlemagne was crowned, the Holy Roman Empire of the Western Empire, there was a woman by the name of Irene who was the Byzantine emperor from 1797 to 1800. Pope Leo and Charlemagne got together a little bit before he was crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor of the Western Empire, and they sort of thought about how Charlemagne should react to her. Should he go to war against him? He did, in fact, have several wars with the Byzantine Empire. And in fact, in one of them, he captured Barcelona in Spain. And those people in Spain, when I was over there a few years ago, they want to split from Spain for good reason. It's probably the strongest part of the nation. And Spain and Portugal, in my judgment, are still paying for the Reconquesto when they drove all the Jews and Muslims out of their country. They lost their best minds, and they're some of their most capable people, but that's another story, and we won't get into that debate because you'll have the scholars on both sides arguing with one another. So Pope Leo does crown Charlemagne as the king of the Franks. No, an earlier pope did that. Charlemagne crowns him as the Holy Roman Emperor in that Western Empire, which was Europe. When the Christians lost the Eastern Mediterranean to Islam, where were they going to go? They went to natural place. They went into the Frankish kingdom. They went into what ultimately was France, and that's behind the whole spread of Christianity. They lost the East, but they moved to the West. And there's still all kinds of division between East and West, and we don't want to get into...
The Holy Germanic Roman Empire continued until 1870, when Bismarck and the Prussians took over all those 318 principalities that was part of the Holy Germanic Roman Empire. But when that was at its strongest, It's like the European Union minus England today. That's why they call him Father of Europe. And they kept that in mind when they were making the first conglomeration of Europeans. Now they're so much bigger that it's a little bit further into the east than Charlemagne ever went. But anyway, the thing about it, it's time. You saw the entree of the lady in charge. But before we stop, let us say then, if you possibly could have a question.
Okay, I have one last closing statement. I want to go back to what Harry Truman said. If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. That would be a good thought for anyone that's going to vote in this next election. Anytime you try to use the state to produce or to promote some religious concept, you're going to end up regretting it in the future. So what do we learn from the history of the fall of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the fact that the Russian Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox and the Nestorius Church and the Coptic Church, all of them have split off from what used to be one body? Well, one thing we might learn is be very careful of trying to impose your will on the people of your nation by using the government to do it.
So, any questions? Just ask one just for the heck of it. There's one back there. Kev has a question.
Is it true that Charlemagne actually couldn't read?
Charlemagne could probably not read Latin, but he could speak it, I think.
That's true.
Good.
He did not read, but he knew Latin and wanted everybody to, but he didn't have time to learn to read.
He was too busy fighting.
Well, maybe. And having children.
And we as a world haven't learned much about a better way to solve problems than going to war. Last Sunday, our chaplain talked about the need for love your enemy as yourself, and et cetera, but all of those good Christian principles were pretty hard to put in practice.
Amen.
That's like most of us admit that we
Thank
need
you
the
so
grace
much,
of
Don.
God.
Let's go. Thanks, Don. Remember, 2 weeks from now, Susan McPhail Taylor. Chapel. Okay? Love to see you. Glad so many came. Appreciate it.